All right, so this week is a fun one. I was so excited about it. I was like, yeah. Because when I hear this word, to me it's not like done in a timid way. It's like a battle cry, so it might be a little loud. Be bold. Be bold. And it's just like this battle, this war cry. Be bold. Be strong. And so we find it in Joshua 1:9. It says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And to me, when I think of God having this conversation with Joshua, I envision kind of like an army movie, where the general is coming on the scene to give this man a passionate cry to get their blood going and being like, okay, let me light the fire in you so you can go do what I'm calling you to do. And so I envision God just doing this and having this battle cry with Joshua so he can get going and do what he needs to do. So have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And so as we come to this week of be bold, I had to be bold in walking in obedience to make the decisions I had to make in order to have freedom. I had to be bold in order to get the healing. I had to face things. I had to evaluate myself. I had to look at my own sin, my own flaws, my own weak, negative perspectives of life. And then I had to also look at other people through different lenses. But all of it, I had to be bold in. I couldn't be timid in it. I couldn't be weak in it. I had to have courage to do what God had called me to do. And the thing with it, I always, growing up, I was very shy, timid. I was the one that would be in hiding. My sister was the outgoing one, and I was like, you can just be there, and I will be behind you. That was me. And so when I was like, hearing about be bold, I was like, yeah, God, just make me bold. Do that for me. Like, make me bold, make me courageous. And then as I was going through this healing process, I realized that being bold is not something God makes us do. It is our choice. It is our response to who God is. And so it's not something he will make us do. It's not something he will make us walk in. Instead, he's telling us, choose to do this. Rise up within you, cause your spirit in you to be bold. It is something you have to act out. It is something you have to do in response to who I am. And so as we get the idea then of what be bold is, and that it is our response, our choice, I started thinking about who I could talk about from the Bible. And I had done a study a couple of weeks ago on Ruth, and I was really excited because I was like, oh, this will be perfect. And I talk about Ruth and be bold, and I was getting everything ready for it, and God goes, no, you're not talking about Ruth. You're going to talk about Rahab. And I was like, okay. Like, we'll talk about Rahab instead. Let's change up my plans. But I was like, why Rahab, God? Like, why, out of all the women in the Bible, why her? Because I really wanted to talk about a woman. We hear a lot about men, but I really wanted to find a woman who is brave. And the Lord just reminded me of who Rahab is. And so we're going to start in Rahab. So we find the story of Rahab in Joshua 2 and also in chapter 6 of Joshua. So we're going to read, and I'm going to stop throughout it because there's different points I want to pick from each of the verses that we go through. So Joshua 2, 1 through 12. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Right there, we get an image of her character. She is a prostitute. According to the Israel laws, she should be killed. She should be cut off. She should be stoned. It's not something to be proud of. And yet, we find that this is exactly who God is going to use. And so God was like, well, why not Rahab? We're talking about someone who's in sin, someone who people would say, why would God choose her? Why would God want to use her? Why, she made all these mistakes. She's done all these things. And God is like, this is who I chose. And there's a reason for it because we compare ourselves as women to other women. And sometimes we'll be like, oh, I'm way better than that one. Or sometimes it's like, oh, I'm like way down here and they're way up here, and we have these things of comparison. And I think God just wanted to cut that off and say, regardless of what you think of yourself, I choose who I'm going to use. And if they're willing to be obedient, if they're willing to be brave, they can be used by me. And I can change countries. I can change the world. So now we'll start in verse 2. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy on the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. I paused when I got there because I was like, oh, you're telling me she knew exactly what was going on, and you're telling me that the king and all those around her knew? Like, it's not a secret. The king knew where the men were. And so I pictured then Rahab, like, I don't know, I always just saw her as this weak woman who's going to hide. But no, like, she knew others had already seen this happen. She had to be creative. She had to get her mindset wrapped on what she was going to say, how she was going to cover these men, hide them. Like, she had to have a process through this because the king knew where the men were. He goes and he sends men to her. And then she has a choice because obviously if the king knows the men are there and they find them and they're not hidden well enough, her life, her family's life, I mean, they could very well lose their lives. And so it's a choice she has to make. What am I going to do? Am I going to be brave? Am I going to stand for what I know is right? Am I going to do this, or am I going to cave? Am I going to all of a sudden let the king take these men away? And I never thought of it that way before, but I'm like, she's like us. I would be thinking that way. I'd be like, okay, I have a choice now. I can either continue with this choice, or I can stop and pull back and just let whatever happens, and maybe my family and I will be spared. And so we see then that in verse 4, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax. So she had laid out on the roof. So she boldly contradicted the king of her city, and without fear of what would happen to herself or her family, she chose what was right. Verse 7. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Rahab understood the time. She understood what was going on in her country. She understood what she was facing, what her people were facing, what her family was facing. News of Israel and their God had spread throughout the land. Now, if we put this in with the water of the Red Sea, we have to remember that Israel had to wander the desert for 40 years because of sin until all those over the age of, 20 died. And then they were able to enter the promised land. So we're talking like 40-something years that news has spread throughout the land concerning Israel, concerning the God that they worship. I mean, the manna, think of that, like, oh yeah, God, he feeds his people. They wake up in the morning and man is there, like all these stories they know. So she has wisdom, she has discernment to understand what is happening in her country, what is happening in her city, and she understood what the risk of it was if she chose not to do right. She understood that Israel was blessed by God, and so she knew that with this opportunity, if she didn't choose the right thing, they would win over her and her family. It was not a question of if it would happen, it was a question of when it would happen. When would Israel come? When would our land be taken? And so I just love that idea of it, that Rahab understood the time. She had discernment. She had wisdom to know and to decide for herself, like, I'm going to give my family a way of escape at least. I'm going to try to do this. And so we get to verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Rahab had to be bold because she had to believe that the spies would fulfill their promise to her. And she had to hold fast without wavering in that. Like, I would probably question it. You know, I'm like helping these spies. I'd be like, okay, did they really mean it? Are they going to really keep their word? Are they going to pass this on to Joshua? Will Joshua accept this? Or will he be like, you didn't ask for my permission, therefore it's not going to happen? You know, just all these questions I would have running through my mind and questioning and doubting. And yet we see that she had faith because she followed through with what they told her to do. Put the cord, the red strand, on your window. Be in that room. If you leave that room when we come, you will not make it. So whoever of your family is there, they have to be in that room to be saved. So Rahab had to be bold. And I always assumed that the fall of Jericho took place right away. Like the spies left, they came. But it actually is quite a span. Like some people say it could be 6 days. Some people are like it could be 7, 8 days of waiting. There's really no way of knowing, but it didn't just happen. Why? Because the spies had to hide for 3 days. And then you have the circumcision happening of the Israelite. And so the army had to wait to heal before they could come and do what they needed to do. And so we find that this time is there. To me, I was like, oh yeah, you know, because your brain goes straight to the Israelites. And they're like, yeah, they're doing all this stuff. But you forget Rahab's waiting. And she doesn't know the time of this. And so she is in a process of having to wait and wait. She had to be on guard. She had to be watching for their return, watching for when the men would come. And then once they returned, she had to get all of her tribe into the room in order to be saved once they got there. And so we find then that the army comes, so they're in the room. But it never hit me. Rahab had no idea how Israel would take Jericho. She had no idea how this would all play out. Israel did. Israel got the steps of what they needed to do to take out Jericho. Rahab didn't. She was completely clueless as to what was going to happen. And so I was envisioning this. I'm like, okay, her family and all of them are sitting in this room in their house along the wall, because her house was a part of the wall. And what was going through her mind? What did she have to tell her family? Did her family think she was crazy for being bold and doing this? I mean, honestly, would they think, like, are you sure that we should be here along the wall believing we're going to be okay? Like, are you sure about this? And so I just envision it, like, Rahab had to be bold. Like, she had to have the courage, and she somehow had to have the words to keep her tribe in that house. And I don't know how she did it, but it takes a mighty woman to be able to do that, I think, to keep a tribe, to keep men, children in a room, in a house, waiting. So we find out that what the Israelites have to do. For 6 days, they would circle around Jericho once a day. The priests would blow 7 trumpets every single time. I always thought it was silent until I read it again. I'm like, no, it says there's 7 trumpets blowing. So for 6 days, they're listening to these trumpets being blown. And I could just imagine Rahab being like, is it now? Is it going to happen now? Like, what's going to happen? Are they going to just, like, charge, attack? Like, how are they going to come into the city? What are they going to do? And so for 6 days, they're waiting. The tension, the not knowing, having to trust that these Israelites are going to keep their word and that their family is going to make it through. We then get to day 7. On the 7th day, they marched around silently to the sounds of the trumpets 6 times again. On the 7th circling, the people were finally allowed to shout. The walls fell, the city burned, and the people killed, but they remembered Rahab. And I was starting to think about that. I was like, once that shaking started, the walls fell. What was running through her mind? Would some of them try to flee the room and flee the house because of what was going on, the chaos and the noise outside? And then you have the fighting and the lies and the screaming and then the burning of the city, and they're listening to all of this while they're in the house. What must they have thought? Like, to be bold and step out and then trust and have faith, and not to be, if it was me, I'd be like, okay, do I still need to wait here, or is it time? Like, can I get out now? Can I step now? Can I move? Is it time? That would be me. Like, okay, I hear them, can we go? And then want to make a move to go. But no, they waited until they came and got them, and then they were brought out of the city and then grafted in to the Israelite family. And so this whole idea with Rahab is, I can relate to her when I put it that way. When I think of it as in a perspective of she's a real person. What do we think about? What do we go through when we're going through hard times, when we're being faced with things? She would have gone through the same things. She would have gone through the same feelings, the same perspective of things, and yet she was bold. So why do we need to be bold? If we're not bold, we will take the easy way out. If we're not bold, if we're experiencing trauma, if we're experiencing betrayal, whether it's church, family, friends, if we're experiencing sins that are holding us hostage and we're not able to break the cycle of those sins, all of those things, we find ourselves cutting ourselves off from others. We find ourselves ignoring our emotions and feelings instead of dealing with them, instead of dealing with the sin, instead of dealing with the mistakes, the pain, the hurt, all these different things. We find that we're not able to move forward. So if we don't want to take the easy way out, we have to be bold, and we have to take those steps, not always having the answer. Rahab didn't have the answers. All she was told was be in the room waiting. And if you're in there, you're saved. That was it. She wasn't given the instructions about how the city would be taken. She wasn't led on to anything. And she had to do her part. She had to be brave and stand in the waiting of it. And so each one of us, God is calling us to different things, different places. He's putting things on our hearts, friends, different things, different spheres, different atmospheres of things. And he's asking us that while we're stepping out in this, will we be bold? If it's waiting, will you be bold in the waiting? Will you courageously stand when everyone thinks you're crazy? Will you stand for what is right? Will you stand for a truth, or are you going to cave? Are you going to be bold in this? Are you going to be bold in what I've called you to? And the other thing, too, is, maybe you've heard it, maybe not, is something since COVID I've heard a lot of people talk about is the rapture and wanting Jesus to return. And I think that's great. I want Jesus to return, but not yet, because I know that there are people who need to be saved. I know that the bride needs to be positioned where she's supposed to be before Jesus can return, because we still have prophecy waiting to be fulfilled, even in Revelations. But a lot of people, when they get that focus, they're just like, okay, I can't wait for Jesus to come back. I'm going to forget everything else around me. It doesn't matter. I just want to escape. And that's the whole thing. I want to escape. Okay, let's say Jesus doesn't come back right away. So then we have to go through these hard times. Let's find a place and we can get away from, and we don't have to worry about people finding us. We don't have to worry about what people, we can hide. And I'm just like, Rahab hid men and the king knew. What are you, we are not called to do that. We are called to keep the ground God has given us. We are called to keep doing the kingdom of God and not stumbling back, just waiting to be rescued because it's getting hard. No, this is the time that we are bold. This is the time that we are courageous and that we stand. So we need to be bold for justice, for truth, We need to be bold for those who aren't able to stand for themselves. We need to be bold for the kingdom of God, for the sphere he has given us, whether that's work-related, ministry-related, family-related, friend-related. We need to be bold for our futures, for the future of our children, and for the salvation of those around us. And we are required then to have this boldness. It's a choice that we have to make. And with that, if we are bold, we will be able to win the race set before us. We'll be able to meet it to the end. We'll be able to be found faithful. And so as we're going through this week, there might be times when you would rather be comfortable. You would rather be, I'm tired. I don't want to take this step. I don't want to be bold. But God is going to make, because we're talking about it, God is making opportunities then this week to have you make that choice then to be bold. So be aware of that. Be focused, like, God, how can I be bold today? Don't let me miss out an opportunity to be bold for you. Don't let me just hide away or not, don't want to cause ruffles with anyone. No, be bold, be courageous in truth, be bold and courageous in what is right, because if we're not, how is someone else going to get saved? If we're not willing to step out and be like, you have a need for God, there is something wrong here, we're not going to be able to do what we've been called to do. We're not going to be able to go and help people. And so just take that time this week. How can I be brave? How can I be bold for God? How can I speak to someone this week, with love, but also maybe point out some things that they're needing correction on? And so just be aware you're going to be tested on it.